what what are the macro challenges. Later, I'll be going through quite a bit of data on that. And based on the macro challenges, then each one of us, or we could also be thinking about our relatives, thinking about our uncles, aunties, or our cousins. How should we be planning for the wealth transfer to our loved ones? Part of the issue comes about because of our stamp duties and tax considerations, which are relatively onerous. Okay. So today's agenda, first I will run through quickly and recap the presentation that I did at the forum. And during the forum, I did also do a poll. So today I'll show you the poll results, what people have voted they would do based on the 4 options that I have provided. And in the poll, there's an extra option of not applicable to me. And then I will slow down the pace a little bit, share with you a typical Singapore family that is living in a 4-room flat, Mr and Mrs Lim. We then discuss a little bit more about demographics, and then we think about how to do the wealth transfer. And with the data that I'll be showing you about what's coming up next in 10 years' time and in 20 years' time, put all this data together, let's consider what we should do about transferring our real estate. Okay, so this was the presentation that I gave 3 weeks ago at the CPF and your retirement forum by the Precepts group. So my self was whether we should be financing our home with CPF, a lot of CPF and less cash, or a lot more cash with less CPF, or zero CPF, all cash. Or many of our younger people in the audience might be very little cash, almost all CPF. So I went through this presentation, started the setting the context. So 64% of active CPF members are hitting their retirement sum requirement. This deserves a little bit more investigation. Actually, this 64% only referred to the people who are covered under the year 2020 report. These are the people who have turned 55 and they have got sufficient, whether they have got sufficient in their retirement sum or not. And this retirement sum includes the property that has been pledged. So meaning in terms of the remaining cash amount may not be that much. But then 64% may sound like an improvement, especially versus 2018 number when it was 59%. What happened to the other 36%? So 36% of active CPF members at 55 years old actually still didn't have enough money based on the expected lifespan that we have. They didn't have enough in their CPF based on what CPF calculates as the minimum sum that we need. With or without using their property, they haven't got the minimum sum. So in fact, it is a situation that is worth looking deeper into because it may have major impact on our social safety net and on how much taxpayers might have to carry the burden of providing for people without sufficient retirement cash. And this might be one reason why DBS has pushed out a new mortgage. It is only for people who have paid up their home loans already, the homes are without loan, but where one or both parties do not have sufficient CPF so they can then borrow against the home. In the current context, the people who are already retired and who might need this scheme, who might take advantage of this reverse mortgage from DBS, the numbers would include the homemaker, the housewife or the house husbands who did not have a regular income throughout their labor productive years. And so usually it is one breadwinner with the other one having very little in the CPF, but their private properties have been paid up already, and now they are short of cash, but their private property is still worth quite a bit of money, so they can then pledge the property to get a top up into their CPF. So this reverse mortgage doesn't give them cash. This reverse mortgage tops up their CPF to the full retirement sum and then allows CPF to pay out monthly to the borrower. So not sure why DBS thinks that the market size will be big enough for them to launch this product, but it certainly does hint that we have a lot of retirees who are asset rich, cash poor. So if we are now at 50, we are late 40s and we are planning forward and we are looking at 55 years old, do I have enough for full retirement sum? How much can I withdraw, let's say, from special account? We can start to adjust our budgets, even adjust our spending habits. Or we might want to reorganize how we repay our home loan. But for people who are already past 55 or for people who are already past 60 years old, then realizing that they are asset rich, cash poor could be a little bit more painful, especially since we know that as we go towards our retirement age, getting a well-paid job, getting a job that's comfortable with a steady income becomes a lot more challenging. Now, we reach 60 years old and then we realize we are asset rich, cash poor. There's no way we can rewind our lives. It came about because of what we did when we were young. Okay, so a decision that you have made when you are 30 years old, at 60 years old, you look back, then you might find that it wasn't optimal. If you could have done it over again, you would have chosen a different method of, say, financing your home or getting accommodation over your head. You might have chosen to rent or to rent for a few more years before buying, or you could have chosen to buy something a little bit more fit for purpose rather than stretching your budget to buy something bigger or more expensive. So how much do we fail to earn from CPF? This was at the forum, I did up these scenarios to explain. So in this case, use an example of Mr and Mrs Wong, both 30 years old. They purchased a 4-room HDB flat. It could be a resale, it could be a BTO, but it is 400,000. Friends, families, and relatives gave them all sorts of suggestions about how they should pay for the new home, but they've decided to do the calculations for themselves to check what might be the opportunity cost they give up. What might be the opportunity cost that they suffer, not give up, if they use various forms of payment for their home. CPF mixed with home loan mixed with their own cash. Okay, so for financing options, the HDB flat price is on the left hand side $400,000, and then option A using 70% bank loan in blue, CPF in dark green 20%, cash 10%. So they are using more CPF than cash. Option B and option C are the same, also 70% bank loan, but option B, the bank loan, similar to option A, the bank loan's monthly repayment is serviced by CPF. In option C, we use monthly repayment to the bank loan, cash. Option B is a little bit more conservative. Only CPF, only 10% of the down payment is from CPF. The other 20% is from cash. and part of the 10% CPF could actually be the first-time home buyers grant that's given to Mr. and Mrs. Wong, depending on their salary, depending on all the other qualifying criteria. So they could use some of their CPF together with the HDB grants that they are eligible for. But they chose to use 20% cash, which is $80,000. Okay. Then option D is the most conservative one, and if possible, that's my suggestion. Let's be more conservative. Take out 30% cash, use 10% CPF so that you can retain more CPF, because there could be rainy days, especially with respect to employment and retrenchments. And then for the 60% bank loan that is taken out, the monthly payments, we use CPF. So these four options, let's examine what is the long-term scenario in terms of the money that you would have earned, the interest that you would have earned from CPF. So option A, you take a 70% bank loan. So 70% of the 400,000, that's $280,000 bank loan. And you are paying monthly using your CPF monies. Okay. So over the next 25 years, from age 30 right up to age 55, they would have withdrawn. At the beginning, they withdrew 80,000 of CPF because they used 20% as their down payment, so they put in 80,000 from CPF already. Part of the 80,000 could also be from the grant. And over the years, next 25 years, when they pay down the monthly mortgage at an interest rate of about 2.5% over the entire 25-year period, they would have withdrawn about 440,000 from the CPF. If they have not withdrawn so much from the CPF in this 25-year period, assuming that they lived with their parents, they didn't buy this property at all the CPF that they earn remains in their CPF accounts. They would have made 206,000 of interest income. So CPF board would have paid them 206,000 if this blue line were not expensed from their CPF to fund the purchase of this HDB flat. So 206,000 is quite a bit of money, especially if you are stepping into your retirement years. Okay, so option B, using 20% cash down payment, CPF 10% upfront, which is 40,000. And then the rest of the 280,000 loan every month is serviced by CPF payments. And this is the result, just less than 440,000 overall withdrawal. What is the interest lost? 172,000. A little bit better. You have improved compared to the previous scenario by about $30,000. Option C, which is very conservative, using less CPF, more cash for the down payment, and then borrowing 70%, and in the mortgage payment every month is made in cash, so they don't touch their CPF at all. So interest foregone. Even then, just taking out 10%, which is $40,000, this $40,000 that is taken out from the CPF account for the next 25 years, the cumulative earnings of 2.5%, just assuming it is 2.5%, the interest foregone is $34,000. And this is just due to the withdrawal of 40,000. So this one is the most conservative. You have lost some interest, but you have only lost 34,000. Then option D, which is conservative, but still monthly payment of the loan servicing is by CPF. So initial outset, you probably, Mr. and Mrs. Wong will have to borrow some of the cash from their relatives or from the parents. So they took out 120,000 of cash. They put in another 40,000 of CPF, and then they borrowed 240,000, and every month they pay for the 240,000 loan using their CPF. And still, under the smaller loan to value ratio, a smaller size loan against the HDB flat over the 25-year period, because they use monthly CPF for their monthly mortgage payments, there is still interest foregone of 152,000. So nowhere did I say that we should use zero CPF. I say we should use some CPF, but then I summarized it in this chart and say interest foregone for option A, B, C, D, these amounts, and then I asked the audience at that time to submit their replies in the poll. So later on, we'll take a look at what's the result. Now, then I added on to the scenario, and I said, Mr. and Mrs. Wong then upgraded to a condominium later on when they could sell their HDB flat at $600,000 due to their better career progress, due to their promotions as well as bonuses that they have collected over the years. They sold their HDB flat at a nice, neat profit, but they upgraded to a $1.5 million private apartment. So then they used 150,000 cash and they used 300,000 of CPF. And the monthly installment is also paid using CPF. By now, they have got accumulated extra savings as well, both in cash and in CPF, so they can afford the $1.5 million property for upgrading. So for the first 10 years, their interest foregone was 40,500. And at the end of 10 years, when they were both 40 years old, they sold the flat at 600,000 in order to buy the $1.5 million condo. And they borrowed 25 years to pay down the loan of 1.05 million using their CPF. When they are finally retired at 65 years old, their home loan has been fully paid and discharged. What is the CPF interest that they have given up throughout this journey from 30 years old to 65 years old? They have owned 2 properties in their lifetime. At 65 years old, what did they give up in terms of the interest that they would have earned due to the home ownership? The interest foregone would have been 40,000 plus 773,000, a total of 814,000. At 65 years old, when their loan is fully discharged and they look back, then realize that this was the amount of money taken out of CPF caused them to have this opportunity cost of not earning 800,000 is a little bit late. Of course, this scenario is a little bit extreme, showing that they use so much CPF for their payment towards the home. Most people would be using a mix of CPF and cash to pay for their home loans, especially for the private properties. But this is the amount that they would stand to lose if they had so much CPF to pay for the monthly mortgage payments. So they chose to forego 800,000 of CPF interest. Their CPF life then will be paying them based on whatever is the sum that is remaining in their CPF retirement accounts. So in fact, at 65 years old, if they found themselves to be asset rich, cash poor, what should their decision be? Should they sell the condo and downgrade? Or do they actually have enough cash savings because of their good career, so they do not really need the CPF life monthly payment to them? So how many people will actually downgrade? That's my question. We are an aging population. This is our Singapore population pyramid based on the year 2020. The red box shows baby boomers. This black line that just popped up is the cutoff for 65 years old. This black line that just popped up, the horizontal black line, shows 250,000 population. So from this year onwards, year 2021, you see this cohort that is 60 to 64 years old. There are about 280,000 of them. 5-year cohort, 280,000 of them, meaning each year there are more than 50,000 of them. And each year there are more than 50,000 of them. Starting from this year, 50,000 of them will be celebrating their 65th birthday. And this is the group that is growing and will add on to the retiree population. We use 65 years old for Department of Statistics to calculate, classify people who are considered retired, families who are retired. Okay, so how many of them will be considering downgrading in future? So in the past 10 years, these cohorts that celebrated their 65th birthday, if they do consider a downgrade, there are not so many of them per year. But for the next 10 years, these two cohorts will be all crossing their 65th birthday. If they all start considering, or if, let's say just 10% of them start to consider downgrading, there will be quite a lot of people who are then shifting from big to small or shifting from private to HDB, which may be good news for people who own HDB, but then of course it depends on the budgets of these people who need to downgrade. And of course they could also have the chance of buying some of the 30-year HDBs that are for retirement housing scheme. So from the year 2021, for a continuous 40 years, captured in this oval-shaped balloon, for continuous 40 consecutive years, more than 50,000 Singaporeans will be celebrating their 65th birthday. So retirees may be leading to property downgrading. We'll talk more about this later. So then another piece of news that came out from the same CPF annual report is that there are more and more CPF members now voluntarily topping up their CPF. For the CPF that has been withdrawn for housing, they are now paying back. So obviously there are more and more people recognizing that they should be having more CPF monies for their retirement, so that the monthly payout after they're 65, after they're already 65 years old, the monthly payout to them would be larger. So my recommendation is, let's avoid future regrets. We cannot unwind, we cannot rewind our lives. So today, let's not stretch. For those who are still young, let's not stretch the budget too much. And where possible, use more cash rather than use more CPF to service your home loan. So my recommendation was that for property that is $100, try to just take a bank loan at $65, so a 65% or lower loan to value ratio. And before you actually start buying the property, you should have amassed CPF of about $30 and cash of about $30. Once you have that as your capital, then borrow $65, use $15 of CPF, $20 of cash, such that you can still have reserves of $15 CPF and $10 of cash. At the same time, your CPF is compounding at 2.5%. You're using less CPF, using more cash to pay for your home. Why? The gig economy, jobs are unstable. CPF pays you 2.5%, no sales charge, not like buying into an investment fund, not like buying into stocks, trading stocks where there are commissions to pay. CPF pays you 2.5 net without you having to lift a finger, no sales charge, net or commission. The 2.5% will compound, which will be really helpful by the time you reach 65 years old. And in this gig economy and entrepreneurship type of economy, expect a lot more uncertainty and potential failures. So what's the advantage of CPF versus cash? It is untouchable by creditors. This protection, in case, excuse my French, in case shit hits the fan, creditors are chasing after you, they can't touch your CPF. So in case of a business failure, you already have got issues with managing cash flow, your CPF becomes the safety pot that would still pay out to you when you are 65 years old. So I would advise my younger self to first build up more financial wealth, invest wisely, don't rush into buying a property, especially given that in the next decades, the job uncertainty versus when I started work in early 1990s, iron rice bowl was not just iron rice bowl, there were plentiful jobs in Singapore. We could still job hop. Today, job hopping is not because of choice. Many people job hop because it is a gig economy. You jump from one contract to another. So consider renting first and building up finances before committing to a purchase. Build up enough capital, then take out part of that capital in order to buy a property. Go for a smaller mortgage, let the banks earn less money. Okay, and have sufficient 24 months worth of CPF and cash to cover the mortgage in case of emergencies. Because what happens if Jack Ma offered me to run his new startup, low salary, lots of stock options? Do I have enough reserves to be able to tahan my home loan, pay off my home loan while I work for low salary but lots of stock options? Or what if you want to quit from a toxic boss? This toxic boss trend is now being a lot of discussion, especially I see a lot of posts on Facebook or Instagram talking about certain toxic bosses. If you want to have the freedom to be able to quit from a toxic boss or a company, you should have reserves. You have to have capital. Otherwise, you are handcuffed to a home loan, which then handcuffs you to your toxic boss, right? Okay, so the poll results then turn out to be most people selected option C, meaning the pretty conservative choice where the monthly payment is being serviced by cash so that the CPF is built up. So there's 10% CPF used at the outset for the down payment. About 10 people out of the 85 votes said it doesn't apply to them, so that's 12%. So these percentages do not add up, only added up to 88%. And I guess thankful that the audience has understood the message that option C would be the one that reduces their opportunity cost by the largest amount. Okay, so now let's come to today's agenda. I've spent half an hour talking about recapping what I said at the forum. So today's agenda is about wealth transfer. How do you, at the point of 65 or 60 years old, consider transferring your wealth? Another couple, Mr and Mrs Lim, 65 years old, very typical. The four-room HDB flats in Singapore is the largest stock of flats. So it is the mode. For those of you who still remember some of your secondary school statistics, it is the mode. Out of all the different HDB flat types, four-room flat are highest in terms of the number of units in the market. They are at 65 now, they want to downgrade to a three-room flat. Their current four-room is worth 390,000 net of fees and expenses. Mrs Lim had put in 170,000 of her CPF during the years of paying for the flat. Mr. Lim is partly homemaker and partly odd job worker, and so he has got very little contributions to CPF. This is an actual couple that I have met to advise them about their home sale and then a repurchase. So we examine how much they will get from the sale of the flat. 390 proceeds from the sale. So that's already net of the agent's commission. So 170,000 to be paid back to CPF. The interest that she failed to earn from the last 15 years of using CPF to pay home loan as well as down payment, 75,000. So they have net cash proceeds of 145,000, but because they are both 65 years old already, they can withdraw CPF. They still must maintain the minimum full retirement sum. That's mainly actually for Mrs. Lim, because Mr. Lim has got very, very little in the CPF, and he didn't use his CPF at all to pay for this home purchase. So she can withdraw an additional 135,000 from the CPF. So final amount of cash received from the sale of the flat is 145,000 plus 135,000, 280,000. So using this 280,000 of cash now, they are hoping to be able to buy a 3-room flat. What might be their next challenges? This is almost all of the cash savings that they have right now. So let's go back to Singapore's demographics again. This is the cohort that is considered baby boomers. Baby boomers grew up during the nation building years. Home ownership was strongly promoted ever since the late 60s and early 70s. We want everybody to own a home, safe shelter. You can focus on your education of the children. You can focus on your jobs, safety and security. No more squatters. But at that time, majority of them were single breadwinner, single income families. And therefore, CPF savings are also one person having a lot more CPF savings. And that one person has probably used up quite a bit of his CPF money in his home purchase. This group of people, home ownership is close to 100%. And their homes make up the bulk of their net worth. The number of people in these groupings, more and more are going into retirement. Just now I pointed out to you that the group that is 60 to 64 years age, the 5-year cohort, there are 285,000 of them. The next cohort, who are today 55 to 59 years old, the next cohort is even bigger. There are 306,000 of them, meaning every single year on average 60,000 of them will be celebrating birthday of that age group. Where will these age groups be in 20 years' time? The median age of our longevity is about 84, 85 years old now. So once you hit 65 years old, on average, there's a good probability that you would have another 20 years before you expire. Okay, especially this year, I think some of our data will change because of the COVID-related deaths, which might be in excess. And so due to that, due to these numbers, maybe this year and next year's data for the median age of death might be adjusted a little bit. But if everything blows over and we return to a more normal world post-pandemic, possibly we can go back up to that 85, 86 years type of age for expiry age again. Okay, so in about 20 years time, from 65 years old, in about 20 years time, we expect to pass away. That is when our property will be handed over. That's the that is the wealth transfer being executed and the real estate transfer being executed. So how many of these people who are baby boomers have actually planned their wealth transfer and planned their real estate part of the wealth transfer? Most people would have written a will for their financial assets. The property, equally distribute to my children. But how many types of homes are there? HDB, you can equally distribute to the children. Landed home, can you equally distribute to the children? And non-landed home as well. What are the restrictions? What are some of the things to consider? Landed homes cannot be owned by foreigners. One of your child could have gotten his new Australian passport or US passport. Can you transfer your landed property to him, for example? Okay, so there are other considerations, especially financial ones: seller stamp duty, buyer stamp duty, ABSD, and the CPF usage. There's, in case on our demise, there is still a home loan or there's a credit line attached to the property, there is a mortgage servicing ratio, TDSR, sort of the loans part to consider. That when you're willing the property to your loved ones, they may be inheriting the property together with the loan that comes on the property. So Singapore's demographics, we think, how does this affect us? Thinking about what will happen in the next 10 or the next 20 years. How many of these people, upon their demise, would be selling their properties or would be transferring the properties to the children, and then the children may sell the properties. Before the demise, how many of them passing 65 might decide that because I am asset rich, cash poor, I need to downgrade by selling my current property and going downwards in either a smaller size or by going down to a HDB flat or by going into a smaller HDB flat. All these may seem very complicated, but I've actually covered quite a lot of it in my book. Sorry, advertising time now. You can screenshot this page and go to the Shopee shortcut link below to buy a copy of this book. I explained it, this wealth transfer and real estate, as well as how to analyze the next 10 to 20 years in this book called The Future of Real Estate. It was just published in earlier this year. So a lot of the data is still valid. Okay, so like what I said just now, how many homes owner occupied? 97% of HDB 4-room flats, 97% of HDB 5-room and executive flats are owned. And these people at 65 years old, 70 years old, if they decided to downgrade because they need cash for their retirement, asset rich, because the 5-room and executive flats easily are $500,000 to $900,000 or even $1 million depending on the location. The 4-room flats could be between 400,000 all the way to 700,000-800,000, again depending on location and age. And so if they wanted to downgrade in order to shore up cash for their own retirement for the next 20 years, there's quite a lot of owners who could be downgrading. So higher home ownership rate also means that there could be a solid, strong pipeline of sales in the resale market. So that's downgrading while they are still alive. And of course, then in 20 years' time, as more and more, as the cohorts of people hitting the expiry age grows, then the resale supply could come about due to the passing away of some of these owners. And for them, do they have inheritance plans already? And how many units, how many flats or private properties that they have willed down to their loved ones, will the loved ones keep these properties? Are they allowed to keep these properties? And if they're allowed to keep, then how many of them will keep it instead of selling it in the open market to redistribute as cash amongst the siblings or amongst the beneficiaries. So now looking at the situation from a different angle, I want to look at the age profile of our HDB flats. These are all the HDB flats completed in the last 50 to 60 years. Most of those that are completed in 1960s, a lot of them have already been demolished. The footnote there says total number of HDB flats demolished has been around 127,000. Most of the 1960s flats, other than those, for example, in Tiong Bahru, the Queens ones, they have already been demolished. 1970s flats today are already 50 years or between 40 to 50 years old. The 1980s flats are between 30 to 40 years old. The combined, in the green box, these cohorts of the 1970s decade, 1980s decade, 550,000 flats. By the year 2030, these 550,000 flats would be all more than 40 years age, meaning the 99 years lease is now left with 59 years. How many people will be interested to buy HDB flats that are left with 59 years of age, of remaining lease? How many people will be eligible to use CPF and bank loan to buy a HDB flat that has got a remaining lease of 52 years, for example? Those that are in the 1970s cohort, in the year 2030, which is 9 years from today, they would be all left with about 55 years of lease on them. What's the implication of these aging flats? And if you happen to be 65 years old, then thinking about downgrading, you want to sell your flat, let's say Toa Payoh Lorong 1, Lorong 4, let's say those in Circuit Road, Aljunied area. These flats are left with about 50 years on the lease. What price can you fetch in the market? So I, together with some of my students, we did an estimate on how many flats might come out into the open market for resale due to the death of the owner. So of course it's complicated. There are two people own it. The first person who passed away, usually the other person will continue owning the flat. So it has got to be the second passing away of the couple before the flat would be transferred to their children. And if all three children or both the children already own their own HDB flat, they can't be inheriting another flat. And in fact, they probably wouldn't want to be inheriting an old HDB flat. They would probably sell it in the open market, in the resale market, and split the cash. And then what price, what value this old flat can fetch in the resale market is another unknown. But most likely, the flat price would be depreciating. So in the year 2020, on the lower bound, year 2030 on the lower bound, in the rectangle in the middle, which is the yellow color, canary yellow colored one. The lower bound is 3,300 flats could be sold a year in the resale market due to the death of the second owner. The upper bound is 8,000 flats. In today's market, okay, let's not use the COVID market. 2018, 2019, the resale market each year was about 22,000 units. And therefore, if you have 8,000 units coming into the resale market to add on to the usual number, that's quite a lot of pressure on resale prices. So, of course, owners start worrying about older HDB flats being a depreciating asset. What does it mean for your nest egg when you are going into retirement? Lease of your flat depreciates, and the value of the depreciation, the speed of the depreciation accelerates as the flats go beyond 40 years age. it is confirmed by the minister that the flats will depreciate to zero at the end of 99 years. Of course, we can hope for sirs, we can hope for verse, but it is a little bit of a lottery. When you are at retirement, do you want to play with a lottery when you have insufficient cash? Right? So restrictions on the home loan, restrictions on the use of CPF means that there are fewer younger people, there are fewer people in the market who are interested to buy these old HDB flats. And due to these restrictions of purchase, the market shrinks a lot for old HDB flats. And that's why we simulated a depreciation curve, which the authorities didn't quibble with, because this is a theoretical depreciation exercise. A Marine Parade HDB flat that was transacted at 860,000 in the year 2017. It has 56 years of lease left. We went through various scenario studies to understand after 20 years what would happen to it, after 30 years what would happen to it, and by looking at CPF restrictions or home loan restrictions, we guess how many people might be willing to pay $500,000 for it or $400,000 for it. And for sure, the smaller the market is, the less you would be able to fetch for the resale price. And with less than 20 years left, you can't use CPF, you can't get a single home loan. The remaining lease of the flat basically is the price you're willing to pay to rent it for the next 20 years. And we quite generously already gave it 180,000 in a single lump sum payment, and no loans available. So how many people are actually willing to buy your HDB flat that is left with 20 years on its lease? So that's how depreciation can happen. So this impacts whether you should be downgrading today when you're 65 years old, or whether you should actually hold on to the flat and try to bequeath it to your children after your demise, right? Because if you think that you can bequeath it at a good value in future, that's probably very likely to be wrong. Perhaps then sell it today and downgrade so that you at least cash in on when your HDB flat has got a higher value. So back to the Lims. I know I'm overshot my time already. Back to the Lims. I will be quicker now. They have got two options. First option, which we recommended to them, was sell your current flat and just rent a 3-room flat. But of course, Mr and Mrs Lim wanted to sell and then buy a 3-room flat. But just now looking at what they have in terms of cash, buying an old 3-room flat at 280,000 actually would have used up a lot of their cash in CPF. So option one, they pay rental of about $2,000 plus their living expenses every month, $3,700 a month. Based on the cash savings they have and based on the CPF money that will be paid out to Mrs. Lim, because Mr. Lim has very little left in his CPF, they can probably survive 9 years, assuming Mrs. Lim stops working. Just based on this calculation alone, we told Mrs. Lim, it looks like you have to continue working for quite a few more years. So living off the savings, assuming Mrs. Lim stopped working now, at 74 years old, they run out of their cash and they survive on the little bits of CPF that will be paid out to them based on this scenario of renting. Option two, they sell and then they downgrade. And when they downgrade, they can still use a bit of CPF pledge for the 3-room flat that they buy. But it reduces her CPF life payout to $400 a month. And home ownership also comes with additional expenses, S&CC charges, there's property tax that they have to pay. So Mrs. Lim again has to remain employed. But this was the option that they actually preferred because they wanted to bequeath it to, they wanted to have something solid, a physical asset to bequeath to the children. So in summary, increasing proportion of flats have less than 60 years of lease. Whatever the wealth of the individual family, the high home ownership situation requires most family to plan for their wealth transfer with real estate in particular properly considered. Increasing restrictions on HDB ownership, HDB aging valuation, depreciating HDB, we have to consider this very carefully. So bequeathing real estate is complex. We have to plan the wealth transfer of our properties and our liquid assets as early as possible. So I have already asked the questions, what should Mr. and Mrs. Lim do? I've already answered you as well. I don't think that this is the correct way of thinking, that they prefer option 2, buy a 3-room flat, and it allows them to bequeath it to the children, because both your children, by the time Mr. and Mrs. Lim meets their expiry date, both their children may already have a HDB flat each, and therefore they are unable to inherit this HDB flat anyway. So might as well let them inherit cash. Okay. Now, we have gone on a rather simpler note of a typical family, which I see many of such families across Singapore already going into retirement and living and owning a 4-room HDB. But there's another segment which is also pretty typical, families that have got a private property, of course smaller in numbers for sure, but they have got 2 or 3 private properties. So now I want to invite Mr. Lee Chiwi to tackle this scenario, which is another scenario which I have seen quite often. In fact, this year I have probably met more than probably up to 5 clients who have come to me for their advice on Swee Yong, what should I do with this property portfolio? Because my children, they are professionals, they are doctors or they are engineers, and they are busy. They don't feel like doing what I do, which is collecting rent and answering to my tenants. So Prem is 70 years old, this scenario, and we'll have Chiwi to explain how he would tackle this. He lives alone after his wife passed away. He's in a 1,500 square feet condo. He has 4 other properties, a small retail unit in Tanjong Pagar and 3 more private apartments in D9, 10, 11. His 3 children are professionals, already married with kids and living in their own apartments, which previously Prem was a senior professional in a prestigious firm. He accumulated his wealth and he kept buying property. So all his 3 children have got 1,000 square feet properties after they got married. Same story. Prem now wants to will the other 5 properties, the one he's living in, the small retail unit plus the 3 investment apartments. He wants to will them to his 3 children. So, Chiwi, please, with all your experience in managing families' wealth transfer, explain to us how you would help to coach Prem in terms of his thinking.
All right. Can you hear me? And I hope the host can have my video on. I can't start my video.
Lisa, can you give the co-host rights to Mr. Lee?
You can hear me, right?
Yes, but if you could come closer to the mic, then you would be even clearer.
Hi, Mr. Lee, you've been made the co-host, so you can be able on your video.
Are you seeing me now?
Yes.
Okay, fine. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Swee Yong, for that coverage earlier. Okay, so let's look at this case study. And there will be that segment of people in Singapore who are more fortunate, being able to invest in properties since they probably in the boom years from the late 80s. You know, we had some nice runs. So Prem 70, a baby boomer, very lucky, able to invest and buy and sell properties along the way. And in estate planning, I guess you want to have a conversation with Prem and say that, look, you are alone, your wife has passed on, and there are potentially issues of mental incapacity that could happen at some point. So you might want to draw up a lasting power of attorney. And in this space of lasting power of attorney, I guess people predominantly do a LPA Form 1, which is a general form of the power attorney. In many of the cases, for the more wealthy people, doing a lasting power of attorney Form 2 might make sense because it allows the ability to put in more instructions to your donee as to what he should be doing in terms of the management of your assets, for example, like the properties, and even putting in a restriction that the home that you are living in while you are mentally incapacitated should not be sold. Can we go back to the earlier the case study again? Thanks. All right. So he has children who are all married. But leaving aside such issues, stamp duties can be a big consideration for many of us if we are going to leave behind a property to our children. Inheritance per se does not trigger any form of payment of stamp duties. So if you pass on and you left a property to your children, they inherit it, they may sell it after that, it does not trigger any payment of stamp duty. However, you might have families whereby a parent actually dies leaving a property in certain shares to, let's say, the 3 children in equal shares. So you might have a child who inherits a 1/3 share of the property that you left behind for them. Now, that child, if he was going to get married, looking to buy his own property with his newly wedded wife, might find that it becomes a problem because when you inherit a property, that now becomes a 1 count as your status when it comes to assessing whether the additional buyer's stamp duty is applicable. So having an inherited property, even though you own just a 1/3 share, will cause a problem because when you go to the show flat with your newly wedded wife and wanted to buy your first property, the lawyers will tell you that, well, it's going to trigger additional buyer's stamp duty. So you might want to be careful there if you're simply looking to will away any of your properties to children who might be getting on a marriage and looking to buy a property for themselves. They will find that this becomes a stumble in some ways. Another thing that before we get into showing you a structure which is very popular is to also tell people that for a lot of couples who own properties, it's quite likely to be in joint tenancy. So the rule is that when one of the couple passes on, it leaves the survivor to be the whole owner of that property. And therefore, you'll still need a will to deal with the succession of the property, right? So we have in the past, many people who say that, well, I already own a joint property with my spouse. Do I need a will? After all, the rules of joint survivorship will kick in. But be mindful that we do not know who is going to be the survivor. And it's equally important, therefore, that each of the couple would also draw up their wills. Sometimes we have people who own property and they own it in tenancies in common. And the reason why they might have it in tenancy in common, it's because they want to give their share of their 50% of the property to the people that they wanted to benefit. Well, that would work because you can will away your share of the tenancy in common, or shares of the property. But be mindful that you are potentially also causing a problem for the people who ending to become the tenancies in common, the tenants in common. You might end up having from 2 persons originally owning that property to then 3 people or 4 people, and if these people also pass on, you might end up having multi-owners of the property, which makes it very difficult to carry out a transaction like a sale over the property, or even trying to rent out the property, because you have, let's say, 5 co-owners, and each of their consent will be required. All right. Now, for property owners who then feel that they want to ensure that the value of the property is preserved, as in, for example, for many condominium owners, at some stage after several decades, the property owners of the strata development might want to agree to do an en bloc sale, right? But that time may not yet come. And if you are like Mr. Prem, and one of your private property in District 9, 10, or 11, very valuable, freehold property, and it might be earmarked for an en bloc sale down the road. Now, if you pass on untimely and your will was silent as to what your executor and trustee had to, they were not empowered to hold on to the property. They actually would have to sell it and distribute the proceeds of sale of the property to your beneficiaries. You could think about drawing up a will, putting in specific provisions to say that a certain property that you now own is to be continued to be held by your executor and trustee on a testamentary trust, and only to be sold at some future date, such as when there is an en bloc sale. All right, so these are some of the possibilities. And I'm going to now introduce to you a very popular trust structure, which is what I describe as a standby trust. Thank you for that slide. And it looks a bit complicated, but if you can see my cursor, this is the trust that is set up, and it's called a standby trust. And the idea of a standby trust is that it is a trust that is dormant for the time being after you have set it up, but for good reason. It's good reason in the sense that you can decide that it is only activated upon your passing, and the assets that you own from your estate would only flow into the trust upon your demise. And that's the beauty of setting up this trust, but not having it activated for the time being. The reason being that while you are still alive and your mental faculties are still with you, you want to continue to own your own assets. You want to enjoy and spend your assets as you like, but in the event of death, then this trust get activated. So it's like putting the instructions, just in case something happens tomorrow, then the trust get triggered. So what I could suggest to Mr. Prem would be that if you have several properties all your children have already owned their own property, and why not build up a portfolio of real estate that could be held in trust for the long term, with these properties eventually sitting in the trust upon your demise, right? So you can see that you draw up a will here, and in your will, what you say is that all of my properties, the properties in District 9, 10, 11, will be held by the trust only upon my passing. So you preserve the ability for the trust to hold on to these properties for long periods of time. And you could imagine that over long periods of time, that could be the rental income that could be accumulated in the trust. There could be significant capital gains along the several decades when the trust continues to hold it. And the money that is accumulated could always be distributed out to your beneficiaries along the way. So if you wanted to provide some legacy, for example, monies to provide for grandchildren's maintenance or grandchildren's scholarship fund for their university education, this is one way to do that. You set up a standby trust. You say in a will that all my properties are to sit or pour into the trust only upon my death. And with that event of death happening, it may not happen tomorrow, it may not happen in 10 years' time, but one day we know that time will come. Then only the properties will flow into the trust. And then you have a professional trustee that manages the property, rents it out, maintains it, carries out the repairs as and when necessary. And with the rental income that's accumulated, the trustee can follow your instructions to distribute monies for maintenance of beneficiaries for important things like their education. Now, I mentioned the real estate that could be poured into the trust, but really anything that you own today, for example, your investments, it could even involve a family business or cash at a bank or stocks and shares. All of that could also be part and parcel of the eventual trust assets to be held by your trustee for the long term. And then you could have provisions in the trust instrument that say that, well, when my youngest grandchild turns age 35, then this trust is to be liquidated. All the assets are to be sold off, and then the proceeds are then to be distributed to my beneficiaries. All right, so this is a potential structure that people who now own some properties may consider doing this this concept of pooling their resources as part of the succession plan into a standby trust. Okay, I hope I've explained it sufficiently well.
So, Chiwi, if you look at the Q&A, there are two questions, one by Hui Mei and one by Elizabeth.
Okay. All right, Hui Mei, for inherited property with equal shares to your 3 children, does the property become a tenancy in common or joint tenancy with the 3 children? Yes, you can actually elect for the inheritance to be in the form of a joint tenancy or in the form of tenancy in common. Most people would elect for the 3 children to hold the property in 1/3 shares. Okay, what are the procedures or costs to change the ownership type of inherited properties? If you're talking about converting joint tenancies to tenancies in common or tenancies in common to joint tenancies, it is not too challenging. It's possible. Generally, you need the consents of the the joint tenants, you will need a consent of the tenants in common to convert it to a joint tenancy. But for joint tenants, it's possible for any joint tenant to sever the joint tenancy and convert it to a tenancy in common. Right? Elizabeth asks, can standby trust cover also overseas properties? Well, theoretically, a standby trust could get a pour-in of any assets that is left behind by the deceased under his will. So yes, theoretically it could, but then really we got to look specifically at the type of foreign property that is intended to be part of this structure.
Hi, Tony. I saw that you actually raised your hand. I will allow you to speak. If there's any questions, you may ask via the speak. Hi, Tony. Is there anything you wanted to ask? No? Okay.
No, I think I accidentally pressed it.
Okay. No
Sorry.
worries. No worries. Okay.
Okay, in the Q&A, Alan also asked, if you have foreign property, can it be included using the standby trust? I think I've answered that. The answer is yes, theoretically, but we got to look at it with more scrutiny. Yep.
I also wanted to add that the standby trust structure in this slide, we also show that there's a CPF nomination that could go into the standby trust. And this is something that I have already indicated interest to sign up on with the Precepts group, because me and my wife, we have got quite a bit of CPF to will over to let our children enjoy after we are gone. But because my children are still unclear about their career directions, both of them are still in the university, should anything happen to me, it would be a little bit, things might get hairy if suddenly they inherit a very large chunk of CPF money. So I'm signing up on this standby trust type of mechanism, so that my CPF monies can go into a standby trust when I pass away, so that then the instructions that I would have left for the trust would be, if my children were still completing their masters or PhD at the point of my death, they are still not matured enough to manage their own cash, that the standby trust, because then it becomes a life trust, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I add to that. A lot of people might have the idea that, well, you know, trusts are only for the ultra rich people. But if you look at this structure, it is certainly very palatable even for mass affluent families. If you think of it, with the CPF monies that will be held in a trust, and with any insurance policy payouts into the trust, together with other property from their estates at death, like the private property, their stocks and shares and monies at the bank, you could well have an aggregate of several $million. That could be the trust fund that could stretch the distributions to beneficiaries for longer periods of time. Then with the concept of many people who think that when they die, I just give away all my money at one go to my children, right? Sometimes it's not a good idea for people to inherit money too early in their lives. Otherwise, it causes a distraction. But with this standby trust structure, it's like a holding period where someone else takes the money, continues to invest it, and give money along the way to the beneficiaries. And ultimately, when the family members are more mature, when they are married, working, have their own family members, then that might be the time where the capital of the estate left by the parent could then be given to the children without, too much worries. Okay. Okay, there's an anonymous attendee there. What about taxes on foreign properties from inheritance? Well, generally, when you look at properties in certain jurisdictions, there are many potential aspects to consider. For example, if you have a property in the United Kingdom, if you own a property in the United Kingdom and you die leaving the property, then there are associated inheritance taxes, very hefty ones that have to be settled before the property can be succeeded to your beneficiaries. All right. Generally, there are going to be associated transfer costs when people leave behind properties, whether it's in Australia or in Malaysia and all that. There's always going to be the need to engage in the lawyers to help in that transfer process. Okay, so Elizabeth again, can you elaborate on the scrutiny needed with overseas properties? What are the concerns or watch-outs? Well, I think it's to make sure that there is also a will. Sometimes we do recommend that clients who leave behind properties in a second or third country, they should consider drawing up a will to ensure that there is very little disruption in the transfer process. And number two, be mindful of the probate costs. In certain jurisdictions, when you probate property in the foreign country, there are going to be the lawyer's fees as well as a probate fee, meaning fees that have to be paid to the courts in the foreign country and all that. Mr. Lim Fong Him, what is the associate cost in setting up a standby trust? So for us at the Precepts, we have a setup fee of $5,000 for a single settlor of the trust and $6,000 for a joint settlor of the trust. From Alan, my wife and myself have two special needs children. We might need to have will for each one of us and set up the standby trust as well. Is my understanding correct? Yes, it's always useful to channel monies into the trust so that when you're no longer around, there is a trustee who is empowered to follow your letter of wishes as to maintain and look after these special needs beneficiaries. There is an agency, which is the Special Needs Trust Company, that could also be, a trust with them could also be set up. And that's useful because there is a caregiving aspect from that government agency, the Special Needs Trust Company. We have also structures whereby a standby trust that is set up can also have the special needs trust that is set up for a special needs child. So that if the monies at the special needs trust goes very low because it's been utilized, the standby trust monies can also can go to benefit that special trust. Hui Mei, is it possible or how can the standby trust be empowered to invest and grow the trust funds? Well, we are trustees, we are administrators, we act as the trustees, but as trustees, we can appoint the people you think are best at investing the money. So if you have a financial advisor, someone like that, you could tell us that that is a person who should be appointed to look after the investment needs of the trust, of the monies that the trustees will need to seek the advice and to ensure that the monies do give the kind of return that you entrust this person to work out the financials. maybe this question, you want to take it? Yeah. Swee Yong?
I was just typing in the answer. Congratulations on selling your property in this strong market. However, if you were to repurchase today, it also means that you're buying into a very strong market. And given that you are in the retirement phase already, maybe holding back more cash, and in the interim, if you still wish to buy, you can always opt for the option of renting for 2 to 3 years first while you allow the market to sort of settle itself, because today's market is actually a little bit topsy-turvy. We have many people who are stuck in Singapore, not just the Malaysians, the 100,000 Malaysians who are stuck in Singapore for the last 2 years. We also have relatively high salary, high income expatriates stuck here. And therefore, the rental market as well as the property market has been given a boost, despite the fact that the economy hasn't recovered back to the 2019 levels of GDP and jobs and employment yet. And employment is still in the doldrums, because we saw from the recent population numbers that we have actually a population decline and second year in a row. And moving forward, can we recreate as many jobs to bring back these high value people to rent our properties from us? Still very murky and unclear. But you can write me an email, or we can have a call about. We can have a call and a discussion about your specific situation, considering whether you still want to provide for your children or grandchildren as well. There is another question actually not in the chat, not on Q&A. Mr. Tan Eng Tien saying property assets transfer to the standby trust, and upon my demise, the standby trust will receive the properties. There will be no ABSD due to that event happening.
That's correct.
But
yeah,
if by that time the standby trust becomes a life trust, and then if the trust were to sell any one of the 3 properties within 3 years, there will be
no, there wouldn't be a problem with
there
that.
wouldn't be a seller stamp duty as well, because they
Yeah.
inherited it from me. Yeah.
Okay, some other questions. If a PR did the lasting power of attorney and subsequently became Singapore citizen, whether need to file a new LPOA? The answer is no. But bear in mind that the LPA in Singapore only has specifically to do with Singapore-based assets. Okay. Next question. What's the difference between single and joint settlor for standby trusts? All right. So usually if it's a couple, husband and wife, that came to set up the trust, and they have common set of beneficiaries, namely they just want to benefit the children, then both of them will want to bequeath, under the wills, all of their estate into this trust. Or sometimes what happens is that the husband will say that when I pass on, my assets will flow to my wife's estate. And my wife's will also say, when I pass on first, my property will flow into my husband's estate. And then only on the second death, then the assets flow into the standby trust. That's one strategy. Is there government oversight over trust companies? Yes, trust companies are licensed and supervised by MAS, and there's plenty of supervision in terms of requirements for audit and annual returns and for
compliance and governance.
Plenty of those things, just like any financial institution. So trust companies are, they're certainly under the very strict radar of the MAS supervision and compliance. Okay. Can part of CPF monies go into the standby trust? Yes, So what happens is that after you set up the standby trust, you can say in your CPF nomination that you want to nominate the trust to be the recipient of the CPF monies upon death.
Chiwi, Alan's question is follow-up question for you about the special needs scheme.
Special needs savings scheme in CPF. Special needs savings scheme. I'm not sure. Oh, okay. That's probably if you have some special needs children or something, is it? I'm not very familiar with it. But essentially, you put CPF money into this account to provide for or SNSS nomination. Yeah. Well, I guess when you do that, you are actually making a nomination of your part of CPF money into this account. So it doesn't go into the standby trust.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lee and Mr. Khoo, for answering all the questions. So with that, we'll just move on to the next segment, just on a closing. So thank you for both of you on your insightful sharing. So after such an inspiring sharing and Q&A segment, what are the certain things that you can do? Let me just share with you over here. Okay, so every family has different needs and values. So what I can do is can secure a meeting with our estate and succession practitioner, in short ESP, for a 1 hour free consultation. So it will help you understand our services, whether it can meet your family's needs. And also from there, you can complete a simple engagement agreement and provide more details to our estate planner for them to structure your plan through wills or trusts. And then finally, you can proceed to complete the attestation, which is the signing of wills or the setup of trusts. Okay, so if you're already in contact with one of our ESP, you may reach out to him or her. Maybe perhaps him or her might have already invited you, might be the one to have invited you to this talk. But if you do not have an estate planner with you, you can register your interest to have a complimentary one-to-one consultation via the upcoming polls question. So over here, I've just launched a poll. Would you like to register for a complimentary 1 hour? Please select yes, and then from there, we'll contact you accordingly. So just to give it a couple of minutes while the rest of them are indicating their interest. So if you missed out on it, feel free to call into our Precepts hotline or email us your interest as well. So while some of us are registering our interest, let's take a look at a couple of upcoming follow-up talks for the EP from the EP forum. Okay, so a couple of talks that we also have upcoming will be on the 27th of October. We have on Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. by Mr. Lu Cheng Chuan on the Kung Fu behind achieving 1 million by 48 in my CPF alone, estate planning as part of retirement planning. Okay, so next we also do have on the 9th of November, 7:30 p.m. as well, how to build your retirement portfolio effectively with new technologies. This will be done by Samuel Ree and Mr. Tan Hui Heng from Precepts. And finally, on the 27th of November, 9 a.m. in the morning, we have a property succession strategies with discussion on this detailed case studies by Precepts itself. So next, since I guess most of you have already registered your interest for the consultation, I'll end this poll. So the next one will be actually registering your interest for the upcoming talks. Okay, so you can select more than one of the 3 talks I've mentioned over here, and then we will actually send you the registration, the invitation details. Okay, just to give you a couple of seconds, I can see that BC Lim has raised his hand. I will just unmute him. So if there's anything, you can just speak up from here. Oh. Hi, BC Lim. Was it an accidental click or do you have something to add on? Oh, okay. I guess not. Okay, seems like most of you have registered your interest for the upcoming follow-up talks. So that's all that I have over here. If there's anything else, feel free to email us or drop us a call. Anything else to add on, speakers?
I'm just completing a reply to a question whether a testamentary trust is more cost effective. It could well be because a testamentary trust is embedded as part of a will. It's one way to deal with real estate succession, but a standby trust is really for the consolidation of multiple channels of assets and to hold that pool of money for the longer term. Yeah, that's all for me.
Mr. Koo, anything else?
No, thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today and for attention. That's all that we have today for today's talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, speakers.
Thank you.